All right, welcome everyone to another episode of Learning Quick. Super excited today to have a friend of mine who I haven't seen in several years, Mary Baker, on the stream to talk about her transition into software development, the learning process, the looking for jobs, all the things that you might be interested in. Anyway, Mary, do you want to tell people a little bit about yourself and your background?
Yeah. So, hi everyone. I'm Mary. Um, I had spent my whole career prior to learning software development in community roles and program management roles, mainly on the things for engineering teams. I worked for Microsoft for about 8 years. And then I made the decision to make the big move for development recently with the all the time we all had when we're home with quarantining, it kind of, spun wheels in my head a bit and go into detail about that later. But uh, yeah, so that's pretty much my very brief. If anyone has any questions.
Yeah, I think I might. My connection doesn't seem like it's that great. I might have lost you for a second, but I think I heard
Oh,
everything from the intro. Hopefully, we're good. Um,
all right. Yeah.
so
So fun
we'll,
story here.
yeah.
We had. Can you hear me? Okay.
Hmm. Yep.
We had just our luck. We had our cable installed today. So
Nice.
if the when it could be why. If you can hear me now, that's I also have a backup for my phone if you can't hear me.
Okay. I can hear you. I think one of the things I'm going to do, I'm going to pop out the chat and I'm going to close the video portion. So I usually watch the stream as it's going so that I can, if something goes wrong, I can see it. I'm going to take that out, which means I'm using less bandwidth. And close a couple of other things just to be sure. Anyway, I think we're good. And if we have pauses, that'll be fine too. Um, so you mentioned COVID, having time on your hands, which, by the way, the connection that we have is when I was at Microsoft. Mary and I were on the same team, at least part of the time that I was there, for her being a community manager for our developer evangelism team. So we were just kind of reminiscing a few minutes ago on like going to hackathons and like staying up late and being there with all these big like Y hacks and I don't know other big student hackathons in the Northeast. And it was one of those like it was kind of tough to do, but it was also super fun. Like that bond that we had from like traveling to these conference or these hackathons, hanging out with each other, really getting to know each other and spend some fun time together was a lot of fun.
Yeah, we were like family. It was
Yeah.
like you know, how often with colleagues at night and on the weekends, and you really get to know each other really well. So
Yeah.
it's really nice to see a familiar face again. I can't believe it's been four and a half
Four and a
years.
half.
That's
Yeah.
crazy.
When I was going through that, I was like, there's no way. And I don't know, especially I think time recently has had a different perspective in so many ways. But um
Absolutely. Yeah.
yeah. Anyway, you mentioned the time on your hands transitioning into
Mhm.
tech. Maybe what made you consider that as an option? What made you think that that was something that you were interested in doing?
Yeah, so I had a bit of a wild ride after you left Microsoft. So with any big organization, there's oftentimes a lot of, reorganizations. We call them reorg. Um, and so our team was reorg quite a few times. So I started working in evangelism as a business and marketing administrator. When we started working together, I became a community
Hmm.
evangelist and did that for a couple of years. And then the team kind of morphed into more of an engineering team that worked with customers and partners. And so my role also morphed into more of a program management role. Um, and it was a little bit of evangelism mixed with transitioning into like pure program management.
Hmm.
So as that transition happened, I think I lost a bit of zest for what I was doing.
Yeah.
And there were parts of the role that I was certainly interested in, but there's really not a lot that compares to the creativity that you can, infuse to a role like an evangelism role.
Hmm.
Um, and so I had so much autonomy over, decision making and what we're doing. And it was very much like a team driven you know, process for us that we decided where and when we wanted to go and
Yeah.
could make strategic decisions ourselves. So as the team, started to transition, they were really looking for people who were more technical to take these program management roles. And so in the end, after I think things were like fully transitioned out of evangelism, um, they did quite a few layoffs, and I was hit by that.
Okay.
And I share that because it's a little bit of a vulnerability to say that and discuss that. But I think there are lots of people that go through layoffs, and it's probably good that I speak about it because it's not necessarily it's a really hard thing, but honestly, I'm better now that it happened. So lost my job very quickly bounced back and started applying to roles that were comparable to
Yeah.
positions I had before. Um, but then kind of did some like soul searching and digging and figuring out what was really important to me. Um, and at that stage in my life, what was important was being remote, and
Mhm.
I loved travel. I mean, who doesn't? I guess
Yep.
some people don't, but it's a big part of who I am. And so I kind of pivoted at that point and took a role that was more like a contractor position. And I was able to be remote and travel.
Yeah.
So I went all around the world, and it was just a great time in my life. And I never would have been afforded that opportunity had I not been laid off. So
Mhm.
there's silver linings.
You start
um,
to kind of think a little differently. You start to think a little more creatively, maybe, and start to consider things I think that you hadn't before. And I think bringing up the layoff is like that's also still an important conversation. Like transitioning into tech doesn't mean that can't still happen. Like that sort of thing can still happen like in
Absolutely.
your future career and other people's future career here. And I think the important thing is when things like that suck and they happen, like how do you respond to it, and can you find some sort of like silver lining, or like here's how I can use this to do something else that that maybe leads me down a different path, maybe a better path, or maybe just a different path.
Absolutely. And like, I think one thing I've learned over my career thus far is you go through stages and different things become important to you at
Yep.
different stages in your career. And I do think that the layoff was a bit of a kick in the butt for me because I was content,
Hmm.
but was I truly like deeply
Yeah.
passionate about what I was doing? Probably not. But was I motivated to look for something new? Not really, if I'm being honest. So I did see it, in the end as an opportunity. It was a couple days of being in shock. But
Yeah.
after that, I really did bounce back and worked with my network. And people have just been, this was a couple years ago now, but they were so kind. And, you know, I guess that speaks to the importance of networking and
Yep.
being in touch with people and developing strong relationships with people in the field. Um, but yeah, I think in the end, it all worked out. Like I wouldn't have met my fiance.
Yes,
I met him in
congratulations, by
Brazil.
the way.
Thank
This is a
you.
new ordeal. Ordeal sounds bad.
Yes.
This is a new good thing.
Yeah. Is there a negative connotation with
I
that?
don't
I guess
know.
there is, but it's an ordeal.
Yeah.
Sure.
A good
Um,
ordeal, just to clarify.
yes. Great ordeal. So we met in Brazil. Um,
Wow.
I decided to join this group called Wi-Fi Tribe, which is a group of professionals who live and travel together. So you do like month-long trips to different countries, and everybody works remotely. So it keeps people motivated to work a schedule,
Wow.
and then yeah. So
That's cool. I had no idea.
I hate yeah, I hate this word, but they call us, well, I'm no longer, but a digital nomad,
Yeah,
which is just
I've heard that before.
but yes, but it was fun. So I was lucky enough that Wi-Fi Tribe is great because you only really needed to commit to a month at a time. You didn't have to
Mhm.
say I'm going to be gone for a year, like
Right.
remote year. And so we did that. That's how we met. We were friends initially, and then, I bounced around a bit, um, to different places. But yeah, so I can actually say my layoff led to that probably,
Yeah. Well, and
among other things.
yeah, you never know. And sounds like maybe just embracing it and turning it into something that's really cool. Like I've never been able to do anything like that. And my wife and I've always talked about what like we'd love to just have a month or so to go and do something like that. That's really special. I think not a lot of people get to do that sort of thing.
You should. I would say my advice to everybody on this is do it.
Let's do
If you
that.
have any desire to travel, even if you don't, I think it's great to like push your comfort zone a little
Hmm.
and explore new things, see new things. A lot of people get stressed about it and maybe they shouldn't push then, but if you have any interest at all in seeing a new place and working in a new place, if your job can give you that opportunity, hopefully post COVID, maybe people will be
Yep.
more, employers will be more open to remote work. I think they are.
Hmm.
Um, I highly recommend it. I think it's a great way to you become a better employee too because you become very organized and methodical about your work schedule, and then at night you can go and go scuba diving or something.
Yeah.
It's just it's cool. It's a great
And
lifestyle.
even if you're not traveling, one of the big benefits for me working remotely is by the time I was done with work, now I'm ready to get out of the house. Like as opposed to like going to a job and coming home, you're like ready to be at home. Now I'm ready to go out and like do other things. So I found myself like for a while like going and working out a lot more than I had because I was like I had energy that I wanted to go out and do something. So there's lots of positive takes on that. And this is we've got one student in particular in the boot camp that is really interested in remote work and like find your first job trying to find a remote job you like it's more difficult. There's more opportunities than there used to be and
Yeah.
probably even more so with COVID, but it's difficult, but it's still an option. So
Oh,
people
it's
that are interested in that sort of stuff, you can do your research, you can reach out to people, you can do all those things to try to make that happen.
agreed. And like I would say for the right person, it's not even a disadvantage necessarily. I mean, companies that are hiring remote are doing offsites and things so that you can build the rapport that you need with your colleagues. But I mean, we have video chat
Hmm.
now. Like we have so many different platforms where you can truly get to know your colleagues and pair program virtually. I mean, my entire Lambda school journey, the coding boot camp that I went to, um, was online
Hmm.
and it worked for me. It was great. And my entire career at Microsoft was pretty much remote,
Yeah.
with
Right.
travel involved. So
Yep.
yeah, those jobs are out there, and I'm looking for only remote
That's
now
great.
too.
Yeah.
There's no engineering jobs on Cape Cod.
Fair enough. Tech Gadget in the chat put in a link called Remote Year, and it may be
Yes.
exactly what like remoteyear.com. Is that what you went through, or is maybe just something similar
No,
concept? Okay.
uh, similar concept. So remote year, I'm definitely not an expert, but the last I looked into remote year is a year-long program.
Right.
So
And you said yours was a month.
yep,
Okay.
you apply and you hop from country to country and it's a set schedule.
Mm.
Housing, the beauty of these programs is that they help you find housing in a community, which is
Okay.
really great to have,
Yeah.
especially for single travelers.
Hmm.
But it works couples. I've done it with my fiance. We've done it together too. So, but the program that I'm referring to or that I did was Wi-Fi Tribe, which I think
Right. Okay.
introduces a bit more flexibility.
Just for
Yeah.
less longer term time commitment with it being a month. That makes sense.
Well, like even you could do it, James. Like if you took a month where you got permission to work remote,
Hmm.
you could do Wi-Fi Tribe, whereas remote year you couldn't.
Yeah.
You
A little
couldn't do.
different.
So
Yeah. Yeah. The big thing for
yeah.
us is, oh, well, I don't know if you can see the dog back there. What would we do with, we've got two dogs. So we've got another one in the other room. But, um, well, you kind of touched on, or you started to introduce, and maybe this is a good time to like transition into specifically. So you went to Lambda school. That's the boot camp that you went to. What was that? What was that process like? You mentioned that it was fully remote. What was it like for you? How difficult was it? Like, especially for people that are going through something similar, or maybe thinking about it. Like, I think the what I would like to hear is your experience and like, hey, it was really hard, but I knew it was worth it, or I had a good community around me, or like what were the things that helped you get through something that was probably pretty difficult?
Yeah, it was very difficult for me. So, and I'm not afraid to say that. I think that we got to put our egos out the
Mhm.
door when we're talking about software development.
Yep.
I I think that we can admit that it's hard, and for some rare people it's not, but everyone has their moments. Um, but yeah, I guess I could very briefly go over why that I decided to do it because I don't think I touched on that yet, and
Yeah.
then I can talk about Lambda School. But so pandemic happened. We touched on that. I had a lot of time to think. I was in a contracting role, which was always supposed to be temporary in my
Mhm.
head. At this point, I was doing it for a year and a half, and I was like, okay, I really need to make a decision
Yep.
about this time. I need to make a decision about what I'm going to do for the rest of my career, and do I want to change careers? My fiance is a software engineering lead at Tailwind, which is a marketing company.
Wait,
Are you familiar?
not Tailwind CSS?
Not Tailwind
Ah,
CSS,
okay.
although
I
I
well, I
like
was
Tailwind CSS.
Yeah, I was gonna say I saw
Yeah,
that you wrote an article, I think, that included Tailwind, so I was like, "What?" Okay.
yeah,
Still
no,
cool, though, still
uh,
cool.
yeah, big fan, but different company. So they basically, I'm gonna butcher a description of what they do, but they do. He was one of the original members back when they were a startup, and so he's been with them forever and seen the company grow. I think I don't know. They probably have like 75 employees or something right
Okay.
now, but they are, they focus on marketing for small business, generally speaking, and they we're the first official Pinterest partner.
Yeah.
So they help with like scheduling and posting Pinterest pins. They also do Instagram really well.
Mhm.
And they're breaking into other areas too. So that's what he does. But he is a full stack web developer, and he became very acutely aware of what really got me excited
Mm.
and passionate because so we had a very accelerated relationship where we started living together because we were traveling together.
Mm.
So it's interesting how that works.
Yep.
You're able to rule people out pretty quickly, and we were extremely lucky because we very quickly realized we wanted to just spend the
Spend
rest of
more ti
our
yeah.
lives together.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was very obvious from the very beginning that we were gonna work because we went through the ringer, of living together initially. I mean, I don't think anything could be harder than that.
Mhm.
And traveling. So like living out of a suitcase. And so anyway, he would hear my work calls sometimes. I'd hear his work calls sometimes. Um, we'd talk about it. We spent every waking moment together. And then with the pandemic, that got exacerbated, and we were with each other 24/7. So he was like, I know you probably don't want to hear this, but I really think that you might really like software development.
Yeah.
Um, so what I did was all that time I spent traveling, most of the time that I spent traveling as a like individually was in Costa Rica because I built some really close relationships there and have like my extended Costa Rican family there. Um, Long story short, when the pandemic hit, they had been wanting to start a new business forever. And I thought, I'm going to help you build a website. So um, my first thought was to go with something that was more like plug and play. So I go to WordPress.
Yep.
Um, I ended up hiring a developer out of Hungary, I believe,
Mhm.
to build out like the basic template of the website and to use the Elementor plugin, which would essentially allow
A
the,
visual builder.
yeah,
Yep.
so my Costa Rican friends could update the website.
Mhm.
They didn't have to know any coding. That process really introduced me to like architecting something out. I designed the whole thing. I wrote a style guide. I architected
Oh,
out the
wow.
website, and I kind of learned as I went.
Yeah.
And yeah, it was an interesting process, and it revealed, here and there, my fiance Will was, I'll just call him Will from now on. He
Just
was
will.
referring, and he's just Will. Um, he kept like saying, "Well, you can do some custom CSS there. Like, let me show you." And I'm like, Okay." And he'd like take 2 seconds and he would do something custom for me.
Yeah.
And I was
And
like,
you're like,
"How did how
that
did you
opens
just do?"
up and like that opens up a whole new world like really quickly, right?
Yeah. So I played around with a little bit of CSS and HTML to begin with, and like immediately when I saw like even just like a title on a page, I
Yep.
was like, I just did that.
That's the
Yeah.
thing is it being like there's such a big difference in being in a CS 101 class and you write stuff that like logs stuff out to the terminal and you learn about object oriented programming way too early, to be honest.
Yeah.
Like that's what my college degree was like. And for what it's worth, like I've talked about this a lot and I just did a video on this. Like I bombed my first technical interview and a couple of them like so hard. Thankfully, there
Oh,
was nothing specifically really technical in the Microsoft interviews, hence I ended up getting that job.
yeah.
But I was so underprepared, and it was because I didn't care. Like I got good grades and I did my assignments and I passed tests and stuff, but I didn't love it. I didn't appreciate it. But when you get into web and you can see something on the page and you're like, "Shit, I built that." Like that's so empowering, and I think that's why a lot of people start there and then kind of get hooked and you kind of transform your mindset and now you look at something you're like, "Hey, I could build that myself. Like I could do that." Instead of just looking at things the way they are.
Absolutely. It's like a very empowering, addictive feeling for
Yeah,
the right person.
and hopefully a
Yeah.
healthy way.
In a very healthy
Yeah.
way. Yeah. Addictive, another negative,
Yeah.
there's a word that has a negative connotation. So yeah, so I did that and I didn't really think much of it. And Will kept saying, like, I really think that you would like this. And at the time, I was like, okay, I need to think about my next move in my career. And so I started researching coding boot camps and looked at all the different programs that were available out there. Will had heard of Lambda School,
Hmm.
and knowing that it was like a longer program. And I wanted something that was longer and more structured, and all remote because I wanted to do a little bit of CS. They offer computer science in their curriculum
Oh,
at
cool.
like towards the end. Yeah, which kind of differentiated them from some other options. And I wanted super intensive
Hmm.
and I wanted it to be because I didn't want to just graduate as quickly as possible. And I understand why that's not necessarily the path for most people. But for me, it was I have my savings. I'm going to do what I can with that
Yep.
and focus on truly building a strong foundation so that when I enter the job market, I will feel somewhat empowered
Yeah.
to keep learning and have a good foundation, a good starting point.
Yep.
So in the end, I started going with them. They also have an ISA, so an income share agreement,
Oh, yeah,
which
okay.
means you don't have upfront,
Mhm.
um, which is great. And then they, pending you get hired, they will take money out of your paycheck until
Yep.
your tuition is paid.
Yeah.
So it's a great option for people who don't have, a lot of cash lying around.
Mhm.
um, so I decided to go with them, and it was, I enrolled in part of the process of registering. I had to take I took a month long, or not month long. I took a month to take it, but it was like a it was a JavaScript course
Cool.
and like basic HTML, CSS, but like pretty much JavaScript. But it was just a total intro to
Mhm.
JavaScript. Um, so I did that. My mind was a little blown. I definitely, now looking back, did not have a handle on JavaScript at all. Um, but I was able to like show enough that that I could enroll.
Yep.
Um, and then didn't touch it for a couple months, quit my job and enrolled. So uh, flash forward to me being in Lambda school. Um, we go through like different parts of the curriculum. You start with HTML, CSS, and styling. I very quickly learned that I love the front end.
Mhm.
And again, it's like seeing things. I'm
Yep.
a visual person, and seeing things come together and like being able to build something and like see it right away is something that I had never experienced.
Yep.
And and a lot of my work leading up to that point. So I did that. And then once JavaScript started, I thought Flexbox was hard. And then I figured it out and I was like, okay, this is not hard. Which
Shout out to
this is like
Flexbox.
a, yeah, love Flexbox. Big fan. But CSS Grid is so much harder, which shout out to them. But then I figured that
Yep.
so, just dabbled in like I stretched, I did some SAS, which was not part of the curriculum, but I did it on my own.
Cool.
And I just saw the power of that, which was cool. And so I guess my recommendation to people too is explore other areas. Don't just do
Yeah.
what's in the curriculum.
That's something
Yeah.
we talk a lot about in our group is like one from a learning perspective of what's covered in the curriculum, like the content that we have is only so good and it only resonates with people to a certain extent, right? And what that means is like people learn in different ways.
Yeah.
They may read better, they may watch better. Like me, everything that I would read, I would then go search for a YouTube video. Or anytime I'm trying to learn something new, I would go search for YouTube video. And I would also probably watch like 5 different YouTube videos because you never know like what explanation, what voice, what example is going to click more. And so yeah, so going outside of your just standard curriculum for extra resources, but then also experimenting with like, here's things that are not even covered in this curriculum to get yourself some awareness. And that's what I try to do in our class as well. Is I throw in like, hey, this is what we're learning. Here's some alternative technologies that do something similar that you'll hear about out there in the community, so they have a little bit broader scope of like what the ecosystem looks like, which the ecosystem is like very, very complicated. But it's good to have an idea of what some of the things that are out there are.
Totally agree. Yeah. And I think it also, in my limited experience so far, it also mirrors real life and what your job's going to be like.
Hmm.
You're not going to be given instructions on how to do something.
And you're
You're
gonna
going to
figure it
have
out.
to teach yourself a
Hmm.
lot of stuff. Yeah. And so the more I think you practice doing that and getting comfortable doing that, I think the better off you're setting yourself up for when you get your job. Again, in my limited experience. So yeah, I started doing that, entered JavaScript, lots of nights of crying. And it's funny, my Will and I joke about this now. It's like I remember him trying to explain a for loop to me, and I had no idea. I was so frustrated, and I was reacting in a way I didn't even know I could act like. I was so used to I was coming from a position of feeling like I knew what I was doing in my
All the
role
time, yeah,
at my
or at least yeah, in your role.
I knew what I was doing. Yeah, I knew what I was doing in my role. I felt like if I didn't know something, I could figure it out fairly simply. Or, maybe it would take more time, but I felt like I had expertise. And then you're entering this really interesting place. It almost feels like being a kid again,
Hmm.
where you don't know anything. And it makes you feel really bad because you're just in a position of just really truly needing help, and not sometimes everyone, like you said, everyone learns differently. So
Yeah.
sometimes people aren't going to understand how to explain things to you, or that will never work, and you just somehow it'll click when you're coding yourself
Yep.
or something like that. Yeah.
So this especially resonates with me because I've been in a very similar situation, but on the flip side. In college, I was a computer science major. My wife had an elective that she could take, and she took CS 101. That I think points of it she did really learn, and this was also like tougher in the sense, not more difficult, but not again like going back to HTML CSS. You see something happening, so you get a little spark first. This was just like Java and object oriented programming, not the way that I would start anybody, to be honest. Anyway, so she would do that, and like on a nested for loop assignment, like, and there was a couple of these times, like it was really hard for me to understand, to be empathetic and understand it's still not making sense. What can I do to alter the conversation to help? I wasn't very empathetic, and then there was definitely, I don't know if she watches the stream sometimes, but I'll take the heat later on if I want to. But she would have nights of just like so much frustration and crying, and we would not do well in those situations sometimes because it was like we couldn't figure out how to bridge the gap for each other. So I definitely resonate with that. And then also, she's doing my favorite Udemy course of all time. So she's currently going through that and doing HTML and CSS to just actually she's just in HTML so far to get started, and she's been enjoying that, especially the being able to see stuff. So hopefully that continues to progress, and we can have maybe better conversations as I, as a teacher, have become more empathetic to people that are learning.
Oh, I mean, I have so much respect for teachers.
Hmm.
And like Will can probably totally commiserate with he calls it it's the burden of knowledge. It's not what he calls, it's
Hmm.
it's the burden of knowledge. Once you
Yep.
know things, and we knew in our career in evangelism. So there's actually a true advantage to having more junior evangelists on a team because they know how to talk to beginners.
Hmm. Yeah.
Um, so it's like once you get to a more advanced stage, it's very difficult to probably remember what it was like to be
Yep.
in that position. Um, so yeah, I could not wrap my head around a for loop, and I'm not ashamed to say that. I couldn't. I was just like, the I is what though? The I, like I don't get it. Index of that in that the what? I was very confused.
I feel
And
like that should be a
you were
sticker. The I is what?
talking I what? Like so and honestly, now looking back, I'm like, how did I not understand that?
Hmm. Yeah.
I'm so yeah. I'm very that I feel like I can totally understand when someone doesn't get it and maybe be
Hmm.
able to explain it in a way where they might. But yeah, that was a challenge. That was like the first moment of me feeling like the dumbest person in the world.
Yep.
And I always felt like I was smart enough and I could figure it out. And software programming can take you to this low place of just feeling so incapable. Um,
And this
and
is
I've definitely,
like
yeah.
great honesty, but this is what so many of us are like, you should do it. It's going to be great. But we also need to be realistic to say like it's really freaking tough. And it's like if you do a couple of comparisons, people that graduate with a computer science degree have had 4 years of doing this. People that go through a boot camp have 6 months, right?
Yep.
Also, the stuff that you learn in a boot camp is much more practical than the stuff that I didn't learn in my degree. And I learned a good amount. I got prepared. I built some fundamentals to help me do things later on in my career. But there's so much in such a condensed period of time in a thing that people have never done before or they've had very little experience with. They don't know what to expect. They've never struggled like this before. There's so many things that go into it, but hopefully still the end result is like it was worth it in the end when you look back and then you lead on to a career that provides more opportunities, whatever that may mean for different people.
Yep. And I think I'm not afraid to admit when things were hard and difficult. And I still don't feel, I have enough self confidence built up because, like, I really do think our time in evangelism and
Yeah.
working with students helps me in this way. Because I remember those students, we would survey them and get it for what their level was. And yeah, so if I were to be compared to a university student graduate, um, they're going to be stronger in computer science than I am. And they're going to maybe know a couple of different language. They're going to know Java or,
Hmm.
because that's probably what they're still teaching at schools. Um, and they're going to know concepts and things that I necessarily don't feel as like I have a good bearing of.
Yep.
But I'm building a website in them,
Hmm.
and I
Absolutely.
feel pretty confident in saying. And so I think if I can do anything for anyone who's new to coding that's going through boot camp on this stream is to assure you that you're not at a disadvantage here. Um, I think in some ways just play on your advantages, like
Hmm.
those things if they become relevant to your position, you can study up on them and learn them. Like you can learn log n, or, understand like big O notation and know what solution is going to be more efficient than another solution. But generally speaking, I don't think a lot of that, and I don't think touches on Will's job, and
Hmm.
he's leading team
Yep.
at a, a decent sized company. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, James, but
Oh yeah, I yes, I try. We could talk for hours, and we should probably talk a lot more. I want to do one shout out really quickly, just in the
sure.
chat. The Electrics just subscribed, which that in the Twitch world is a paid thing. So Electric, shout out to you for subscribing. Thank you, I appreciate that. And then we've got some people that have been hanging out in the chat. Thank you everyone for having conversations and stuff. All right, so I I have been through like the all day interviews at Google in New York City. And I
Uh-huh.
did, I really well, I think, but not quite to the point where I got an offer. And these are the things where they're looking for the most, almost dropped my marker that I'm holding as I fidget, but they're looking for the most or the best, the most efficient solution to every problem they ask. They're not just looking to solve a problem, they're looking for the most efficient. And that's an extreme. That's it doesn't actually happen that often. And when you need that sort of stuff, you look it up. It's just really
Yeah.
it's just not that complicated. And when you build out sorting algorithms, the sort algorithm is built into the language. Like there's so many of these things, trust me, that and I think we could probably agree on lots of them. I could rant on these all day where it just doesn't make sense. Now, do
Yeah.
do I think that is a good foundation to have, like a good thing, a good knowledge base to have where when you do something, you have it to consider and make different decisions? Yeah. But rarely have I worked on something and done something that was inefficient and that really messed us up. Or it wasn't something that I realized was inefficient because it was bogging stuff down and then made a change, right? Like it doesn't matter if I could solve that in 15 minutes in front of someone live. And I think I may have a segue to an article you wrote that I really appreciated. Um, but that sort of thing, it's not the most telling thing. But to go back to like, it is a nice foundation. That is one of the things that a lot of boot camps don't incorporate at all. I
Mhm.
mean, we don't have time to study it, but I've thrown in like this much in ours just to introduce. It is one of those things that I encourage people, data structures and algorithms. Hey, you should find like a short hour, 2 hour long course that you can follow and get some context and some experience. But it's not the deal breaker. And it's not the kind of thing that I would expect you to do real time. And it's not the kind of thing that I wouldn't expect you to look for help to figure out later on in the real job.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I'm not in the job market. I mean, I don't have a job yet,
Hmm.
and I can say that with confidence just from my career and my background at Microsoft.
Hmm.
I can say that that doesn't, you know, on product teams maybe, but like, you're probably not gonna the chance of you getting hired on a product team at Microsoft at a college are pretty slim.
Yeah.
So, yeah, so I think there are plenty of jobs out there that I don't think you need to know all of that information
Yeah.
for. Like
And
you just, yeah.
And there's almost no job where you couldn't learn it. Like
Yep,
it's that
exactly.
simple. That's all it really
And
comes
you have
down to. Yeah.
Yeah, you're not an individual, you're on a team.
Yep.
And
And
any company that's set up just for individuals is probably not
right.
the kind of team you want to, it's not the company you want to work for anyway.
And I talk about this a lot. Different teams or different companies and different teams within a given company are better at bringing on new hires. So I'm sure you've had lots of these conversations. And maybe some of your instructors have mentioned this, but you should be asking questions about like if I were to get into this role, what will I have a mentor? What kind of time can I expect from them? Like, what is my learning path? Like, how will this progress? Because that's one of the things that I really enjoyed, and I think I did a really good job at specifically at FedEx because I love new people coming in and being able to see them like ramp up like exponentially. And like they graduated a boot camp, and then 6 months later, they're doing like real stuff, like really valuable stuff for a company that they probably didn't expect. And being a part of that is super special. It's super rewarding, but it's something that a lot of companies and a lot of people and a lot of teams don't really know how to do that well.
Yeah, agreed. Agreed. And it's absolutely something that is top of list for me now that I'm, in the next couple of weeks, I'll be diving into a full-time job search.
Hmm.
And it's for me having had the luxury of the experience of working on an engineering team before. I know what I'm looking for.
Hmm.
Um, there needs to be a mentor structure or some sort of structure where I shouldn't be afraid to ask
Yep.
questions. And I'm supported in my journey. And I would love to work for a company that is organized in that way. Um, and isn't probably in my scenario too small where they can't help me.
Yep.
So, there's some really high stress startup situations where you're thrown
It's go,
into the
go, go, go,
fire.
go. Yeah.
Yeah, and for some people, that's probably the right challenge for them. But for me, I'm looking for something that, adds a bit more has a bit more structure to the
Hmm.
way they onboard, individuals and, gives them opportunities to grow and learn. And that's top of list for me,
Yeah.
in addition to the remote
Yep.
was, up
Absolutely.
there and higher.
Yeah. By the way,
But
I
yeah,
don't.
I think that's really important.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. By the way, you got a couple of supportive comments in the chat. Tessa Tickles is her screen name. Tessa's a friend of mine, works at Cloudinary, which is a super cool company that I also get to represent as part of their um, media developer experts program. So I get to connect with some of their employees. Tessa being one of them. She says that tech companies can learn from Mary B's because I've got your Twitter handle up on the screen after I fixed that early on. She brings good points, and then she added like a million or a bajillion percent or something.
Oh,
Um, and then Lawrence, who I mentioned, was in my boot camp. Went on to work with me at FedEx, and he was one of those people that I particularly enjoyed kind of seeing him ramp up and learn along the way. Said, "Great talk. He's got to go, but he wishes you well," and he would be a
thank
good person to get connected with sometime later on, just in terms of
absolutely,
community and learning and first jobs and continuing to grow with that sort of stuff. There's
absolutely.
I
I need all the support I can get.
Well, I feel that's what I was just about to say. I feel like I get maybe overly excited in situations like this because I have so much where I'm like, here's a million different things that you can potentially use. And it may be too much. So I will try to maybe send some things along one at a time to not overwhelm you.
Hey, you know what? I'm not gonna, turn
Turn it
anything
out.
away.
Yeah.
It's a tough world out there. So I could use all the help I could get. And I
Yeah.
know, other people who are in job search right now would probably say the same thing. It's
Hmm.
about, the value you get from networks and people is so much greater than what you're getting from a lot of these, job search sites and things. So
One
bring
more
it
uh
on.
one more time for the people in the back. Networking is super important. That was one specific quote I remember from college in an engineering management class, which I didn't care about. But the one quote I remember is um, networking slash relationship management is the key to success. And that has like stuck with
Mhm.
me so on. And it doesn't like I think networking gets this bad rap of people that, hi, I'm James, I'm blah blah blah. Like that's not networking. Like that's not it. Like building relationships with people is networking and having people that you trust, having people that can provide that you can provide value to and they can provide value to just because you have a relationship, not because you're looking to take something from people. Makes such a big difference. When I applied for the job that I'm in now, I think two people had contacted the hiring manager kind of as her friends saying like, "Hey, James would be a good hire." Like I probably had a decent shot of getting the job myself, but having that sort of other people could vouch for me
Mhm.
makes such a big difference.
Yeah, in my experience, even in the business world, that applies. I
Mhm.
mean,
Yep.
that's totally applicable across the board.
Yeah.
And I'm relying on it now myself. I know as someone who used to hire, you take the word of someone who says they're a good hire so much stronger.
Yeah.
But ultimately, like you're getting the job yourself anyway. You're not going to get hired by
Yeah.
so if there's sort of fear around people feeling like they're going to get the job handed to them, that's probably never going to happen.
Oh, see, you're
um,
just you're just opening
yeah,
up the floodgates for all of my soapboxes because I've said this before. Like my wife at times has gotten a job that she felt like she wasn't qualified for, and then kind of looked at it as like someone gave her a handout or like gave her this really big opportunity. And I'm like, people aren't just giving out jobs and paying you money if because you're an idiot. Like that's not why they pay you. They pay you because you were the best job or the best person to do that job. So I think that's like, and imposter syndrome is such a big topic. It's something I talk a lot about, something our students talk about. It's popular on Twitter, it's everywhere, especially in this industry. Like if you get that first job, you're not don't go in and be cocky, but also understand that like whatever you did leading up to that, like you earned it. Like you earned that. They didn't just choose you because you looked sad and like you needed a job. They hired you because you interviewed and you were the person that they wanted to hire out of the people that they had to look at.
Absolutely. I think it took me um, a lot of years to come to that type
Mhm.
of confidence and conclusion because I was always saying I got lucky. And there's a
Yeah.
lot of luck involved too. I'm not going to
Fair.
say there isn't.
Yep.
There's luck involved. The
Yep.
process is certainly broken. Um,
Yep.
but there's luck involved in maybe getting the interview. But then when you get it, you're getting the job. That's
Yep.
you. That's all you, you know?
Yep.
Um, and I know we alluded to this earlier, but I did recently write a blog post on how I don't know if it was the coding exams one that you're referring to,
It
or was it another one?
is the Dear Hiring Manager Why Time Coding Assessments filter me and other diverse developer talent out, which by the way, I have this up. I'm going to put this link in the chat for anybody else. I would encourage you to go read this for anybody that's here. Check that out. Just open it up, have that tab open for when the stream's over so you can read it. Go ahead.
No worries. No, I appreciate that.
Yeah.
You're like a great, I'm like your little sidekick. I don't even know how to describe this relationship. You got things going
Sidekick
on
is
the
an interesting one.
side. Um, so I wrote that on a morning that I woke up really feeling down.
Hmm.
I was every single job description I looked at, I was like, I'm not qualified for this. I'm not qualified for this job. Um, and I started to reflect on my experience that far, which was super limited. And quite frankly, I haven't done anything since then
Hmm.
for job applications because a lot in my life just happened. But when I jump back in there, I know it's going to happen even more because this is just the way a lot of companies are hiring now. So I found in the not interviews, but the four responses that I got from recruiters, and I had only applied to a handful of jobs.
Hmm.
Um, the four that I heard back from, three out of the four required me to do a coding assessment first. Um, and kind of when I see that, my heart drops because
Yeah.
Lambda School did prepare me in a way where we took enough of those exams where we know what to expect in terms of like the pressure and the
Yep.
time and having to use there's several different, like there's hacker rank and
Hmm.
like
Leak
code
code
signal
and
and a
meta
yeah, and
bit or beta something. I don't whatever. Yeah, there's tons of different ones.
code wars.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's like a bunch. Yeah. And so I was dabbling on those when I was taking my computer science, which was like the end of my journey. When I was taking computer science, we were learning a lot about like just all of these abstract questions. And so as part of the curriculum, we would be taking like on the side, I was doing like leak code,
Hmm.
and we were taking code signal tests also
Yep.
every week. Um, and the questions are really hard. And had I not had exposure to them before, I would encourage, even though I don't agree with the coding assessments,
Yep.
um, I would encourage people to get on Leak Code, especially Leak Code, because a lot of those questions seem to be reflected in some of the exams.
Hmm.
Um, and they're really hard. So I start with easy.
Yep.
And if you can figure an easy one out, then maybe go to a harder one. But even having done some of that prep work, um, it's the questions I received on some of these interviews were insane. They give you a time frame of maybe 45 minutes to an hour, maybe 45 minutes, and they tell you this difficult question, which frankly takes me 10 minutes to comprehend,
Yeah.
because it's written in four different paragraphs
Yep.
with examples where you just have to digest it. And then on top of that, you throw in a person like me. I get very nervous. You probably wouldn't guess from me being on this video and talking and being an
From being
outgoing person.
from being an amazing live stream guest, who would ever know?
I don't know about that. Um, there's a bit of rambling going on, which is one of my things. I end up talking too much and too fast. But a coding exam is it's a very different environment because you know your times, and I panic and I even sweat.
Oh, yeah.
I can't, I can't think at all. I look at a question and I literally feel like I'm gonna have a breakdown because
Yep.
I can't process, I can't think. Is that a true reflection of my capability?
No.
Absolutely not.
Yep.
And am I ever going to be put in a situation at work
Like
where
that.
like that?
Yep.
I'd say it would be extremely rare, and those positions probably aren't a good fit for me, so I'm
Yep.
not going to apply to them. Um, and usually you have a team to fall back on, so it's not like you're going to be there's probably very few situations where an individual would be responsible for something so catastrophic that,
People are looking over your
that he
shoulder waiting for you to finish.
yeah, and I've seen Will in those situations where something goes down and he has to fix it.
Mhm.
um, his entire team's on the call. It's you're not alone and you're supported, and it's you get it up when you get it up. It's not like 30, you have 30 minutes or you're gonna die. Um, it's like so unrealistic to me.
Mhm.
And so I took the three exams. The first one, they told me I think I got some report and it said I got like a 33% out of 100, and I was like,
And
whoa.
how do they
Um,
okay. I wonder
I
how they
don't
even gauge that.
Well, I didn't solve the problem.
Yeah.
That probably takes
Part of
away
it.
most of your points.
Yeah.
Yeah. And part of that was because I panicked. I couldn't think.
Yeah.
I didn't have enough time. I did not have enough time.
Yep.
Um, and when I finally thought I grasped it, I very quickly ran out of time.
Yep.
So I came up with solutions that, I would have had the solution. In fact, I finished it right after the test.
Mm.
And had I just had that extra bit of time, I probably would have gotten a much better mark. But, I guess they look at like what type of, they're probably looking at some of the syntax and where you're incorporating different things, like are you using, a map or a for loop
Mhm.
or a for each something. I'm not quite sure
Yeah.
because it's all automated. Um, and then so that made me feel really, really bad because I was like, wow, I thought I was better than that.
Yep.
I thought I was better than that. I've been doing better than that. And then so I was like, I'm not going to hear back from them. There's no way. And I didn't.
Yeah.
Um, so then I got another invitation, took the coding exam, and I did way better that time because I was able to stay a bit bit calmer, and I did my homework.
Yep.
So yeah, which helps. Does not take away from the fact that I don't think they exist, but they exist. So I did my homework. I tried to remain calm. I did everything I could to be in a quiet space where, dogs weren't barking and people were distracting me.
Yep.
Um, and I took it and I did much better. I solved the problem, but I only passed 6 of maybe it was like 12 tests, and 6 were hidden, so I couldn't also not probably it's
I
just not real.
it kills me. Like if I write a shitty piece of code, I'm gonna be able to
Yeah.
inspect where it went wrong, and I'm gonna
Uh,
be able to
yeah,
control testing it, and I will figure it. Just try not to curse too much. I will figure it out. Like that's part of the process
yeah.
is like realizing what the logs tell you, then going back and fixing it. And that's why I especially hate like if you ask me to write code in a Google Doc like they do in some interviews, I like no, I'm not doing that. Like I depend heavily on my editor for a reason. I don't
Yeah,
need to memorize all this stuff. I let my editor do it for me and I write code faster because of that. Ah, so many things.
it's kind of it's like learning cursive. Do we need to learn cursive anymore? I don't know.
I've never
Should we teach
once
kids how to
I've
probably,
never once have I used cursive except for
right?
signing my name. Never
And
once. Yep.
yeah, yeah.
By
So
the
it's kinda
way,
like
yeah. Oh yeah. Tessa again, kind of really, and Tessa and Shorty B in the chat are really, really resonating. I think with all the things you're saying, and I think you kind of mentioned this as well. But I'm gonna tell you what Tessa said. Tessa said one thing she's noticed as being a woman in tech. The
Yep.
judgment is much higher, and you can sense the interviewer having a doubt. So if your confidence level as a man or a woman drops, you can see them taking that in. And then I can't speak for this because I'm a man, and I come from this perspective as a white male, and I not appreciate it in a positive way. I understand that that has implications in my career as well, and maybe how things are, well, definitely how things are different. But if, especially looking at a woman having doubt in herself, I can certainly understand them having even more doubt in the woman than if it was a man in the same situation in that scenario. And I think you kind of touched a little bit on like being a
Yep.
woman trying to do this, especially in those types of situations, just being an additional level of the gatekeeping of getting into tech.
Yeah, it's 1000% there, and it's unfortunate. Um, and I experienced it in my boot camp. I would ask a question. Something happened to me where I was baffled. I had never had this happen. I have been so fortunate in my career at Microsoft, where the people I worked with saw me as a peer
Hmm.
and I was respected and I had
Yeah.
a very positive experience. I was also working in a role that was probably primarily like a role that a woman would have. And now I'm entering a career in software development where we are the minority.
Yep.
And it's still it's for a reason. There's a lot of reasons. It's a complicated issue, but part of the problem is I do see this happening is that an interview or not interview, even in the job, right? Or like working on projects with people, you're coming into a conversation from the point I get the sense with a lot of people that you don't know anything and you have to prove that you know something. Whereas a guy from the same program I'm in would enter the conversation with the assumption that he knows what he's talking about until he proves them wrong. Um,
Just the complete opposite of like expectations.
and I get that sense, and it's a sense, and it's also proven in the way that sometimes we're treated and the responses we get from people. Um, and so eh, I'll give the example of just so that people can know that they're not alone out there, and also just to bring awareness. A lot of people don't realize that they're doing it,
Hmm.
and I think it really will take people like a lot of active attention to try and not behave that way or to view people that way, especially when they're hiring. But in Lambda school, I had the situation where we had this help channel in Slack, and someone posted a question. And honestly, I was very uncomfortable even answering questions because I thought, do I really know what I'm talking about? And that imposter syndrome, that doubt came in, and I started to doubt myself. But I was like, you know what, I'm going to go out of my comfort zone. Like, I need to. This is the only way I'm going to learn. So I started answering questions. I started asking questions in the help channel, and I answered this guy's question with the right answer. He ignored me and didn't respond back to me. Somebody else wrote something else, he responded to him. Somebody else wrote something else, he responded to him. And he was like, "Nope, none of that's working." And
Not
then
just completely disregarding.
I responded again and was just like, "Maybe this," and no response. And then another guy responded and he was like, "Did you try this?" Which was what I had proposed
And then
in the first part of the thread. And he was like, "Oh, that worked. Thanks so much," to that person. Never got acknowledged in the thread. And I was like, "You know what? I don't normally do this, but I'm gonna say something." So I
yes.
responded. I actually responded and I said I was livid. I had never had anything like that happen to
Yeah.
me. Never, never had anything like that happen to me. And I responded and I was like, "That's what I said at the very that was the first person who responded to you, and I shared that salute. I
Hmm.
shared that with you." And he was like, "Ha ha, whoops." And I was just like, this exists.
Yeah.
This is a problem. And so I think that's like a very real example. And I know it's not directly related to interviewing, but I believe it. I mean, those are the same people that ultimately end up interviewing people. Um,
There's
so
there's so
yeah,
much
for
of
sure.
a deep conversation, and like there's lots of reasons to be self-reflective over the self or the last several years. Um I think collectively people are starting to raise more awareness to biases in general. Hopefully, that
Mhm.
means collectively we're becoming more aware of it ourselves. It's very obviously a slow process. And that's like, I kind of hesitate talking about this from my perspective. And I want to address, like, white male, I get like my opinion is only, or my visibility of this stuff is only so much. But that's why I kind of hesitated and I stumbled when I talked about my perspective of, I didn't want to overspeak for things being different or people being treated differently because I don't experience it, right? Like, I can't experience that myself. But to have, especially in this situation, you come on and give a very specific situation of this happened. And then not only it happened, but also no level of care or self-reflectiveness in the response, I think is even
Yeah.
more telling. There's a chance it could have happened, probably not ignoring you twice, probably not, but there's maybe a chance. But then to get to the point and brush it off. And part of that is
Right.
probably being, I think there's always a difference when you have something happen to people that you care about and then you start to be more aware of that thing. And
Yeah.
that probably, he probably hasn't heard a story from someone in a situation like that and heard how it affected them to know to think about it, and probably unfortunately never crossed his mind. But those are the types of things. And Tessa, again, I think you would get along with Tessa very well. Um, she, what did she say? She agreed. She learned in the past it's easy to be brushed off with any opinions as a woman. And I feel like there's also like the double edged sword of like, if you're too aggressive as a woman, then that doesn't look good either, right? So there's this balance.
Absolutely.
But I think I think there are those moments, what you did, that like you have to make it obvious. And even if they
It's uncomfortable,
don't
but I
respond, yeah.
yeah. Yeah, I agree. It's uncomfortable. It's not the person that I don't want to be that, I'm gonna say it, the bitchy girl that responded.
Yeah,
But it's what goes through a lot of people's heads. And I do empathize. It's not that I don't empathize. I empathize with people because if you haven't been in that situation, then how could you possibly
yeah,
understand? Which is why, unfortunately, the responsibility is kind of falling on us to speak up
yeah,
and say, um, why did you just ignore me? Like that is so, I thought it was a little more PC, but essentially, like, yeah, I can't even believe that just happened.
yeah,
My mind was blown. I was like, this really exists. And that was just like a taste of it. I'm sure there's so much more
yeah,
out there. But um, I do think like people like you, James, are, and we'll talk, we talk about it all the time. Um, you're in positions where you can help change that, um and so it's not like that. It's not, it's an issue for everybody because ultimately we want more diversity. It creates, better products, ultimately better teams and diverse perspectives. So it doesn't just apply to being a woman. It's every,
yeah,
all diversity.
yeah,
And for me, like even just saying like I freeze under coding interviews and I can't think, it's not a true disability. Imagine someone with a true disability and doesn't mean they can't be amazing programmers.
yeah,
So, I guess just to come full circle back to the programming tests, the gist of the article that I wrote was just like, hey, this is happening. It's so common that it happened in 3 out of the 4, and I immediately get cut off and I
mhm,
never make it through a process. I never talk to a human. Um, and I know that I can build amazing stuff. I know I'm extremely capable. I know that I'm going to be an asset to whoever hires me. And I want the opportunity to be able to show that in a way that is really reflective of the real world
yep,
and is not, this make believe thing that only someone who gets a degree in computer science can maybe do. Um, eh, that's that's gonna hurt us more ultimately. It's gonna cut people out. Um, and it's a huge issue. We could talk about it forever, but that's just my 2 cents and my cry for help. And that this is happening. Don't do this.
yeah,
Don't do this. Find a better way.
yep. Yeah, there's so many things, and the hiring process will never be perfect. That, like, I think probably everyone agrees with that. Like, nothing is actually perfect, but
No.
it's not realistic. And I think Tessa mentioned this before. Like, you can study for that, and you can study your ass off the same way someone could study for the ACT. Like, you could take a shit ton of
Exactly.
ACT practice tests and you could nail a practice test, or you could nail
You
the
can
ACT. It's
exam.
not really a reflection
Yeah.
of your understanding. I got great grades in college. That was not a reflection of my understanding of computer science when I graduated.
Mhm.
I completely bombed my first technical interview. And this wasn't even like live coding. This was like, tell me about object oriented basics, like things I should have known. Completely bombed.
Mhm.
I mean, they were, do you know the difference between this and this? No. Like, totally should have known. Um,
Yeah.
That actually was more, just should have been more prepared. That's more on me than the system. But doing that real time stuff, it just doesn't make sense as often as people think it does. And typically drastically less often. I don't know that the Google interviews, like those types of things where, and their reasoning is like, we work with really huge data. So stuff has to be really performant, and that has to be stuff that people are basically educated in, and that kind of makes sense.
Yeah.
Like, it's a different scale. Most companies
Mhm.
are not that, and it's also the like. It doesn't mean that people can't learn those things, or it doesn't mean that people can't do the research when they need to solve that problem. That's what it comes down to. Um,
I agree. The only solution that makes sense to me, and it's not a full solution, it's like very tiny little sliver, but hire for fit,
mhm,
hire for attitude.
yeah,
Don't hire a go-getter, someone who's gonna go and learn on their own and they can communicate and they show passion for their work. You can take that person, and that applies to any type of position, a
hmm,
technical one or not a technical one, and they're gonna be your best hire. Um, so to me, it's like, I'm definitely not the strongest JavaScript developer by far that came out of Lambda school, but I feel like I'm a strong contender to be, for a specific company looking for someone like me, I'm the best employee they can hire,
hmm,
So I think that the process has to change, and I think there's a long way to go before that happens. And in the meantime, unfortunately, we have to bear it. And I know I have a slew of more coding exams coming my way.
yeah,
So I'm hoping I'll get fortunate like you were, James, in that maybe a company that's more progressive in their hiring will skip some of the technical whiteboarding sessions and the coding exam where there's pressure and
yeah,
time constraints that aren't realistic.
yeah. And by the
Yeah.
way, with that, with my Microsoft interview specifically, and I think you would really appreciate this. It wasn't technical in the sense that I didn't have to write code. It was technical in the
Mhm.
sense that I had to talk about things I had built. And
Yeah.
things you've built versus problems you can solve real time are totally different conversations. And I don't know if you've heard this story, but in college, I decided I want to learn about mobile app development. So I took a book from someone on Android, and I was doing the tutorials, and I got bored, and I was like, I want to build a Harry Potter trivia app. Like, I don't know if you like remember me talking about this or not, but
Like
that's what
I
I
do.
yeah, that's what I built. And in 90% of my conversations at Microsoft interviews, that's what I talked about was I wanted to build a thing, and I went out there and I learned how to do it. Like, what better person to bring on your team than someone, regardless of how, they come in and they like not only want to solve challenges, they also have the capability to go out and learn how. And they're not afraid to take resources from people to learn and grow themselves so that they can do those things. By the way, a short anecdote, the last part of that interview was with Bob Familiar. And
Uh,
yeah, oh Bob. And part of it was I'd done mobile app development with Android, and he said, "Have you done anything with Windows?" I said, "No." And he said, "All right, well, take a couple days, look at it, and then come back, and we'll just have a conversation about it." And I think what I was able to do in 2 days was just look at the high level, like, here are the different pieces, draw some parallels between that and Android, and just kind of say, like, hey, like, it seems pretty similar. Here are the different options based on the documentation that I read and stuff. And like, here's what I see. And it wasn't super technical at all. It was just talking about stuff and showing that I cared, that I could draw parallels
Yep.
between other technologies. And then I was a person, especially for that position, that wanted to learn and had the ability to learn and then be able to share that stuff with other people.
Well, I mean, truly, you were an amazing hire for Microsoft. You're evangelizing to this day. So
Yeah.
you're like a true evangelist.
the
But yeah, I feel like the way they did it was right. And it's really unfortunate to see what the real world is really like. And hiring in any field is flawed and it's a
mhm,
huge issue and it's never going to be
yep.
perfect. But I think the first step is getting rid of these coding exams.
Yep. Yeah, and or maybe well, I think one other aspect of that, and this is interesting because it is in the Google interviews. Out of the total, like each time I did this, I had 6 or 7 different interviews.
Mhm.
Every all of them except for one each time, I'll tell you about that in a second, went well in the sense that they were good at keeping you calm. Like they also are practiced in this. They train to do interviews and they have some sort of I don't know if it's a certification, but like not just anyone does interviews. They are intentional about how they do interviews and they want to help keep you calm to see you at your best. They still want to challenge you. They still want to see what you're capable of doing. But imagine if like instead of just giving you that problem, I don't know exactly what the scenario was, but they give you a problem and they're quiet and they're just watching you and they're staring at you and blah blah blah. Imagine if it's a conversation
Yeah.
back and forth, right? And it's a little more natural. You can take a
Yep.
deep breath, you can relax a little bit. You're able to show that much more of who you are. Google, again, still very demanding, still very like, I want to see that you can write code efficiently and you know all these things, but they were practiced at how they do the interviews to help people relax so that they could see the best of them. So they at least had a little bit of a mitigation of like, even for situations like that, still intimidating, still demanding, but they help bring the level of intimidation down.
Agreed, and I don't think there's any way of, like, really I do think there's value to what the situation that you're describing, where it's like, it's a coding problem that you get, and you're engaging with another developer and speaking through it and
Hmm.
talking, and they wanna see the way you're thinking,
Yep.
which I totally get. It makes complete sense. That's actually how, Will's company does a
Hmm.
lot of their interviews, is they
Yeah.
have a problem, but they engage with you, they help you, they give you clues, and it's part of their whole thing is to keep you calm. I think my true objection is to these online let's filter you out,
Yeah.
because we
Yeah.
have 6,000 applicants. So we're going to give you this really intimidating, and you're going to see the time
Mhm.
tick in the corner while you're doing it too. We're going to make it really, and your camera is going to be on, and we're going to record you.
No
No
pressure
human's going to
though.
be on. No pressure. Just relax. You should be able to do any problem.
Yeah.
Um, and so that's the issue that I take. And even introducing a coding exam later on in the interview process could probably, maybe have some value. I don't know.
Yep.
But when you're using it to filter candidates, you're filtering out, and like I briefly did some research on this, you're filtering out more diverse candidates than not.
Mhm.
And so, for a variety of reasons, but it's really something that should be looked into. And I think there's other ways of someone who had responded. I posted my article to LinkedIn, and someone responded that um, perhaps a potential first step to a solution could be to make job descriptions more specific, so you get fewer applicants, and then that way you don't have to weed through. Are you?
There's
You're not.
lots of job descriptions are horrible. It's job
Yep,
descriptions are a shit show. And I
totally.
had a friend of mine from high school had become a recruiter, and she sent me a message on, like, LinkedIn, and I was like, "Oh, cool, like, cool, we haven't talked in a long time. How are you?" And then she's like, "Oh, also, I'm a recruiter. Do you know anybody that's blah, blah?" Okay, well, fuck this. But then also the job that she sent me, I was just like, "You And I took the time to provide the feedback of like, this is really it's not a good title. It's not a good description. And she didn't respond, which really sucked from the perspective of like
Yeah,
you
use your
don't know what the hell you're doing. Like, I'm sorry, but this is shit.
yeah,
And you're expecting people
yeah,
to apply for that thinking they know what they're getting into and thinking you know what you're going to get out of it. And someone with actual industry experience, like takes the time to try to provide value to a friend and like didn't hear anything back. I got reminded of this because I randomly saw the message and the no response in LinkedIn, I think when I was messaging you. And that just sucks.
Wow.
Like there's job descriptions are horrible. And I remember it when I applied at FedEx, they mentioned these technologies and I went and did the slightest bit of research just so I could say like, hey, I've never used this, but it seems like this. Drawing parallels is something I talk a lot about in class. If you can compare something to something else that you do know, that says a lot. Um,
Yeah.
and I went in, I was like, "Oh, I saw that you use blah, blah." And they're like, "No, we don't use that." Like, are you kidding me? Like you couldn't
So
even
who wrote this?
it's just a generic thing that's been around and they couldn't even like have a description that actually fits the job and the things that they use. So those are again, we're going to hit like a million or we've already hit a million different soapboxes. But not taking that time and that effort and not having your team's input into the job description. I think the people who actually know what that role would be is a huge miss. So I agree. Yeah, you could certainly help filter the amount of applications and then feel better that the people that are applying have a good idea of what they're applying for.
And also, big pet peeve, don't call something entry level and then require 5 years of experience.
Have you seen all
Like,
the
why is
memes
every job
of
description
yeah.
so bad? I've seen the memes and I'm like, "Yes." I
Yeah.
was like, "This is just, it's
And
so bad." It's everywhere.
and
Yeah.
when
It makes job search impossible.
it does, yeah. When React came out, they were like React had been out for like a year, and they were looking for like 4 years of experience with React, and I've seen these things where a recruiter would reach out to what turned out to be the creator of a technology, and they were like, do you have 3 years of experience in this technology?" And their meme or their like post was like, "Well, sadly, I'm not qualified for this job. I only have 1 year of experience after creating the damn thing myself." It's
So bad.
such a miss. Yeah, it's really unfortunate.
Yeah. While we are on this topic, so I mentioned how 3 of the 4 companies that reached out to me wanted a coding exam. The 4th was probably just as bad, uh, but different.
Yeah, but
They had
different.
me they asked me to build an app.
I think I saw this
Uh,
in your article.
they asked me to build an app, and it should only take a few minutes. Or I mean, sorry, a few
2
hours.
hours, yeah.
Yeah, it should only take a few
Yeah.
hours to do all these things. Should be super quick, and then the job description didn't make any sense.
Mhm.
So, it was, like, well-versed in, and there were things that just they said Node, and I was like, "Well, so why do I need to use Node for this React app? Like, you don't have me doing anything on the back end.
Mhm.
Like, why are I don't understand, like, it's clearly someone who's a technical writer or maybe even just a recruiter who may not have a background in those technologies or in software
To
engineering at
know how they
all,
fit.
and
Yeah.
they're just whipping together what their team quickly told them. Yeah, like these are full stack technologies that you should include in this description.
Yep.
So I remember being really confused by that. Um, and that was a really difficult, not difficult. That was another really poorly run interview.
Yep.
I never heard back from the recruiter. I built them an app and they never responded to me.
That sucks.
Like, what? So I just, it's, yeah, it's been a rough road, but,
And I would say
I
those
have
are
hope that there are good,
yeah. Go ahead, sorry.
yeah. No, no, I was just gonna say I'm gonna try and stay positive because honestly, that's the only way you can get
Yep.
Um, but I have hope that there are good companies out there that are hiring the best they know how, and there's
Yep.
going to be flaws in every process. But um, I know I'm going to find the right fit for me. It just might take time.
Yep.
You know,
And
it's
that
going to take time for
yep.
sure.
And that time varies from person to person. That's something we talk about in class, as well. Some people might get hired within a month of graduating. Some people might get hired in the next year, and whatever time it takes to get the right first opportunity is the time that it takes. It's interesting that you mentioned the having feedback on their assignment, which like that's a pretty big. I unfortunately I don't want to over generalize. My experience with recruiters and lots of them have typically not been very good. Again, can't overgeneralize. There are
Mm.
people out there that do this job very well. My general experience with the people that I've worked with has typically not been very good. And I think Tessa mentioned something similar to this in the chat, but you said that you gave feedback on this assignment, and I didn't really get anything out of it in terms of like, hey, this doesn't make sense, which is super valuable. She had an opportunity, I think is what she said. So correct me if I'm like misparaphrasing this, but she had an opportunity where she had something like that and then made suggestions and was like, this doesn't quite make sense, blah, blah, blah. And then got the job because of that. Like how valuable of a skill would that be, which you've already shown, right? To not just accept the problem for how they articulate it to you, but actually solving the problem. Like you don't need like that's such
Yeah.
a big topic is I don't need to add these extra things if I can solve the problem with this one. Again, like going back to sorting algorithms, I don't need to write one if there's one built into a language, right? Like that's part of that practicality too. So anyway, that
Absolutely.
I think that directly resonated and with something I hadn't called out yet, and from Tessa in the chat.
Tessa. Tessa and I clearly have a lot in
Yeah,
common.
I think you've made lots of virtual friends and allies on the chat today, which is good.
I'm happy to hear that. Like I said, I could use all the help I can get. It's a rough world out there. Um, but yeah, it's been a really um, interesting journey so far. Like the post graduation, looking for a job. It's everyone's seen this, right? The troughs and the peaks
Hmm.
of software engineering. That's like my everyday. So like
The
anytime,
ups and downs.
you know, and will remind me of it. He's like, remember when you were on this high and you were like, I can do anything. Like I figured out my problem and I'm on
Yep.
the top of the world. And then all of a sudden the next day, I'm feeling like
You
I
hit that
don't
low
know
again.
if I,
Yeah.
yeah, I don't know if I can do this. And you need like you need a network, you need people to reassure you
Hmm.
and bring you back to that place where you have a realistic perception of
Absolutely.
what you're capable of.
Yeah.
And um yeah, so community and all of that is totally necessary throughout this process.
Yeah. Um, that's one of the things that I try to talk a lot with my students about as well is when you hit one of those troughs, like just remember you've been there before and you made it out of it,
Yeah.
right? Like I think that's like every time we introduce a new technology or new concept, I'm like, remember how you felt the first time you wrote a for loop and you like it
Mhm.
didn't click and like now you don't even think about it, right? Like you will continue to go through that. And I think that's one of the things that I've been good at in my career. And this is a positive and a negative thing for me. But I can be super, super practical. Like I can emotionally be super nervous and super imposter syndrome and super blah, blah, blah. But practically, I can move past it because I know I've done this before, right? Like I can embrace that a little bit more. The downside to me for that is sometimes I'm not as empathetic, like talking about the conversations I would have with my wife sometimes. Like sometimes I'm not as emotional or like empathetic, emotionally understanding, I guess, because I can be so practical. And I'm like, yeah, I know you're sad, but just you've been there before, you're fine. Not understanding that it's still not that easy, especially for other people who don't necessarily look at it that way, or it's not as easy to just forget the emotions and just make a practical decision. So I miss a little bit of that stuff, but it has helped me in my career as well.
Yeah. I think can we like just acknowledge how mind shifty it is to start thinking about software programming? It's it's like a totally different way of thinking.
Hmm.
And I really think that someone who's been in it really long forgets that,
Yeah.
because we now always think like that.
Yep.
But for me, I think the biggest hurdle in this whole journey for me has been changing the way I think, and becoming more like problem oriented in a different sense. I've always been,
Yeah.
I've always tried to solve problems.
Yep.
And but it's a totally different way
Different
of thinking,
and a different kind of problem. Yeah.
totally different. And that's the hardest thing to get over. And I'm still, I remember like just learning an arrow function. and just like, okay, I know how a function looks, and or even
And
just
this ain't
learning the
it.
function. Yeah. Yeah. And just being like, that feeling when I first got a function working, I was like, "What?" Like, I just did that?
It's
That's
one
cool.
that's one of those, up here moments.
Yeah, it was an up here moment, but there were so many down here moments before that,
Yeah,
and, just getting my brain to be rewired in a way where I could start thinking. And I'm still, it's still the process for me. I still have
yeah,
to I still constantly look at something. I'm volunteering at the moment. I'm building out another big thing that I would recommend people do if they have the time. Um, Keep coding and do something good, like volunteer.
yeah,
So I'm volunteering for this organization called Village Book Builders, and they provide literacy programs and learning programs to students in impoverished areas around the globe, and they need to build a React app. So this is like, an interesting project to work on because it's all volunteers, so it's definitely not a reflection of real world in a
yeah.
sense, but it truly is something that we're going to build and is going to be out there.
Mhm.
And so now when I'm looking at the screen and I'm coding, I'm like, there have definitely been moments of, I have no idea how to solve this. I don't know what to do. And, if I'm lucky enough to catch Will
Yeah,
and be like, can you please just, after I stared at the screen for an hour, can you please just tell me how do I get the location of where I am inside this application? And he was like, oh, you should just be able to, isn't there a hook for that? And I was like, oh,
yep.
yeah, there is a hook for that,
And
you know?
that's one of those things that I talk about a lot too. Is like there's value in the time struggling. There's value in that, but
Yeah.
it's like a law of diminishing returns or whatever it is. After a certain point, like please don't waste any more
Yes.
time as you're learning because then it's just defeating and it's not practical. So that's what I'm always like, hey, you spend 15 minutes, and if you really don't know where, like oftentimes we can kind of pop in and say, do this thing, go check this out. And it sends you down a
Yeah.
path that is that much better because you don't know for so long. You don't even know what's possible. And I've been there. We've all been there. So after a certain point, hopefully, and this goes into how they help you learn when you get a job, but hopefully you feel comfortable to ask, and you should ask, and you should not use it or think of it as a crutch. It's a, hey, now I'm getting up this hill and I continue to climb from there.
Yeah. My hope is that, um, going back to interviews and touching on the point that you just made, I still struggle with confidence in going through that process. And I'm constantly putting these words in my mouth, like words are coming out of my mouth, like, I'm not an expert on this, but this. I have to stop doing that. And I think people need to stop doing that. It's just like, if you have a question about a problem you don't understand it, ask the question.
Yep.
And I know that that's valued in interviews,
Hmm.
just from Will's feedback and from all the people I used to work with saying like, yes, ask questions in your interviews and ask questions on the job, and don't be afraid to show that you don't know something. It's everyone, whatever facade they put up, has been in that position and still are. Like, everyone is still always learning something new. No one, no matter what they tell you, is an expert in everything. So I just continually have to get in that mindset as I continue to move forward, looking for jobs.
Yep. And the single biggest red flag for me when, and I've been on the hiring end a decent amount, not a ton.
Mhm.
The single biggest red flag for me is if you don't say you don't know something and you explain it to me incorrectly. Like there's nothing more concerning than someone thinking they understand something, running with that, and then leading to something that's not going to be good, right? Like I would much rather someone say, I'm not sure, or here's what I think this is, here's what I know about this thing, but I don't know these other details. And I've been in these conversations a lot where they either want to try to impress you, so they're trying to say too much, or you ask them a question they don't tell you they don't know and they try to make something up. It's the single biggest red flag that I have when I have conversations in interviews.
Agreed. I think there's a delicate balance between not putting yourself down too much, which is what I do.
Mhm.
Like, I'll be like, "Well, I don't really know anything but this," you know?
Yeah.
I really shouldn't be doing that. But you have to be able to say, like, "I actually don't know the answer to that," or "I think I might know. Let me
Mhm.
show you what I know.
Yep.
And this could help solve the problem," or
Yep.
"This is what I would do in that situation." And so that's kind of trying where I'm trying to focus my energy
Absolutely.
on at the moment because yeah. And just I think I speak with such confidence about a lot of these things only because I worked in the industry for so long
Mhm.
and I've observed a lot. And so I've observed a lot of hiring. I've sat in on a lot of the interviews myself. So I'm really coming from a place of advantage in that I a place where I can really kind of derive a lot of my confidence is because I know what it's like to be in on both sides of the chair.
Yep.
And at the end of the day, like I think that most companies would want to hire the person that, like you said, isn't afraid to claim that they or isn't afraid to admit that they don't know the answer,
Yep.
and that is willing to come up with a solution with you or a creative solution, or is willing to learn and willing to receive feedback. So I think those are probably the most important things that that I would assume are what people are looking for in interviews.
Yep. Absolutely. I as soon as it happens, as soon as someone is like, "Oh, it works like this," I'm like, "This conversation's probably not gonna end well." Like, I don't wanna sell people short just on that thing, but then I've got, like, now I'm really paying attention for how many other things are you just not aware of, and that's what I stress in class too, is, like, we're working with specific languages and specific frameworks and specific syntaxes. That's not the goal of this. The goal of this is you understand how applications fit together and the different pieces. You can learn any different framework. Especially as you become more aware of different frameworks, you realize how not different they are. Like they're a little
Yeah.
different, but they're accomplishing the same goal. So if you have concepts and if you understand how things fit together, so much more valuable than you telling me the syntax for something random that's super specific.
And you don't know if the interviewer even knows that language,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? Or knows
Yep.
that syntax. So it's like, you don't need to get super specific. I agree with you. Like, um, sometimes there's like business people interviewing you. So just being
Hmm.
able to like explain in that sense too is probably a good skill to have.
Yeah, I would say that was one of the big reasons that I had success at FedEx, and I ended up like it's a weird thing. It's not a super braggy thing, but I think it's important based on my skill set. Like I became an architect at the time, which is like higher level, looking across multiple applications, helping make decisions on how things come together at a higher level. And I was probably the youngest architect in the company. Like I don't know that it was like all time or anything, but like at the time, I was by far the youngest person doing that job. And I came in from evangelism with such a comfort level of talking about technology. So if they
Yeah.
need someone to go and explain something technical to someone who doesn't know that level of technical, I could translate that. I could communicate that. And that was one of the skills that opened up opportunities for me there. Obviously has started with opportunities in developer evangelism and has continued to open up opportunities for me now as a developer advocate. And maybe one last quick topic. Something I talk a lot about with my students too is they look at this career transition and they look at their career starting from scratch. And it's not the case. I mean, especially like we talked about this a little bit beforehand. Like I have so much respect for everything that you did on our team because everything worked so much better with having you involved. Again, it didn't have anything to do with writing code, but so many things were so much better with you being able to take charge and helping us do our jobs. And those are like you worked at Microsoft, right? Like you didn't write code for Microsoft, but you worked at Microsoft and you have 8, 10, however many years of professional
Yeah.
experience. You have all those scenarios that you've been in that you've handled as an adult, as a professional. Like you have this background that now is a super valuable aspect of your package, for lack of a better word, like you as a person that you get to take into that next role. And I think you kind of mentioned this, like you think you're going to be a damn good hire and a damn good asset for people going forward. You
Yeah.
just have to find the right thing. And I think other people forget that. Like I'm so glad to hear that you've kind of embraced that for yourself. But so many people think of I'm starting from scratch and I don't have anything to show. Like you've got stuff to show. Some of it is you need to figure out for yourself how to package that into a story that makes sense. and a compelling story. Like I've talked about this in one of my videos, like you have to have a reason for people to hire you. And it has to be unique and it has to be a story that you can really tell and it has to be compelling. And all of the things that you've done in your career factor into that package, into that story. But I think it's up to people, your responsibility to mold that and shape that into something that people are going to appreciate, even when it's not as obvious as something as like I went to school for programming.
Agreed. I will say though that they may sound a bit intimidating, and people may not feel like they can relate because we're coming from Microsoft.
Fair enough. Yep.
And so it's in a way, it's like it's a true advantage to have had the experience working
Yep.
on an engineering team, even though I was in a business role.
True.
Um, but what I will say is don't let that dismay you, because I met this guy at Lambda School as an example who was a waiter.
Hmm.
And the pandemic hit, he lost his job, and props to him, went back to school
Yep.
to become a software engineer. He's like, I've always wanted to open my own business. But I just never had the excuse to do it. And he was a great developer,
Yep.
and he wanted to work on in industries, food and beverage industries. So his background in being a waiter for so many years and having so much knowledge of that industry really led him into the path that he ended up taking, applying to positions that would be in that industry. So he was bringing a level of expertise. He was certainly the most unique candidate in
Hmm.
that sense. Uh, so no matter where you're coming from, it's always good to try and focus on that unique background you have, even if it's, you don't have that much experience. It's like maybe you're a stay-at-home mom. Look for positions where there's something that you're passionate about or you feel like you have a lot of knowledge. So like maybe you like with the stay-at-home mom, you have kids at home, you try to get a job at like Honest or something,
Hmm.
and you come with a perspective
Yep.
that is truly unique and is lacking in the industry. And so I guess my um that's what I've been, going at this job search. The mind frame that I've been in has been what kind of unique, exactly what you were saying, James, is like what uniqueness can I bring to this role, and let's focus on that.
Yep.
Um, so totally agree with what you're saying.
Yeah. I'm also super glad, and these are the subtle things that I picked up on. I don't know if other people did, but you called out the fact that like, hey, we're talking about embrace your background, but we're also talking with two people who worked at Microsoft. So it's a little bit easier for us
Yeah,
to say that. And that carries a hell of a lot of weight going forward, right?
yeah,
So I really appreciate you calling that out and also being more understanding for like not everyone has that on their background. Their background could be a great example of the waiter that you talked about still being a great developer. But regardless of what that background is, as we like again address and understand, not everyone has that. But as you understand what that is, and again, craft it, mold it, package it into something that you can sell to people. The other aspect of that that I really appreciate you touched on too is like you can try to find a programming job for the thing that you're already interested in. I love basketball. Like how cool would it be to work for the NBA, right? Like
yeah.
if you do work in a restaurant, how cool would it be to work on an app that like whatever app people use in restaurants to take menus and do checkouts, and those things are becoming more and more digital, right? Like how cool would that be to not only transition careers, do something that you want to do while also doing something that you do have that experience in. um
Mhm.
One question in here, this is from Zach, who's a current student, super talented. Like he's done so many amazing things in and outside of class. But and I'm just kind of curious for you to add a little bit of perspective on this, which is similar to what you just talked about. He said, do you think that managing a restaurant is relatable to coding, managing a team, being goal oriented as a group, etc.? Any specific thoughts on like that scenario? Sounds like it's probably similar to the one you just talked about.
Absolutely. Yeah. Zach, I would say that managing a restaurant is, I mean, I'm kind of coming from a similar background, right? Like I'm coming from business background. Managing a restaurant's business.
Hmm.
Bit like business 101. Yes, absolutely. You're showing people that you're a leader. And I'd say keep it on the resume. And look, if you're looking for, even if it's not, you don't want to go into that field and you hate it. And that's the reason you're out of it. You have management experience, you have experience managing a team. Talk about that, focus on that. Like, how many team members were under you? Was there a challenge that you were able to overcome?
Yeah.
Or like show some numbers, show some stats. Like, I managed this many people and we were able to bring in this much revenue, or, whatever. All these things, just think about what you're passionate about, think about where your strengths are and how you can bring some uniqueness to the software development industry. Like, it's people like you and me who are going to bring a fresh perspective, who are going to bring a different perspective than someone who's only ever been a
Yeah.
software developer. So I would say totally like focus on that 100%.
And there's Zach, we'll have many more conversations about this. Here's a specific example of, again, like molding that story. Like agile is, I don't know how much you've talked about agile in your boot camp. Agile is a super hot topic. It's one of those things that employers think you need to have experience in. That's bullshit. It's just a thing and you'll do it when you get there. Like it doesn't matter. But
You can figure it out. Yeah.
yeah, it's not that hard. You have 2 weeks to do a
Yeah.
job, and then you do another job. Like it's really not that hard. But like thinking about
Yeah.
an agile world, like Zach, how do you translate where you had these different goals or things that you needed to happen at your restaurant, and you had to
Mhm.
prioritize those things, and you did them one step at a time. Maybe you didn't call them sprints. Maybe you didn't call it a stand up with your team, but you organized priorities, even if it's a budgeting decision. Hey, we need these two things, but we only have so many dollars. Which one of those things do we take? And converting that to something that's relevant, I think is super powerful. That's where crafting, I say this a lot, but crafting that story, molding it into that thing that you can really sell yourself with, you can get really creative with it as well and continue to fully embrace the experience that you have.
Absolutely.
Super, like tons of good comments. I think so much relatability in everything, and I knew it would be. Like these are the conversations that I love to have, especially just from a catching up perspective, talking to you. Um, you heard me get very soapboxy because these are things that I'm super passionate about as well. I love to just talk to people about it, and this is the kind of stuff that often just so many people resonate with and have relatable stories, which I think is super cool. So I Anyway, this has been a ton of fun. I think it's the summation of that.
Yeah. Well, not only did we get to catch up after too many years, let's
Yep.
not mention the number again. But it's been a pleasure. It's so nice to hear that there are other people out there that are listening that are in a similar boat, and hopefully can take any kind of, hopefully can get some confidence from what I've shared and like feel like you're not alone. Everyone is, everyone has their own unique experience, but everyone goes through some tough times. And there's a lot of learnings and a lot of good best practices that we can all share with each other.
Absolutely. It's as tough as the community can be, again, talking about diversity and that sort of stuff. It also can be so incredibly amazing is one of my big pieces of advice. In
Yeah.
in diving headfirst and really embracing the community is so helpful for all the reasons that we talked about. So, by the way, this is the longest stream I've done with a guest. Like not in a very good way, a very very good way, but this is the longest one. And we talked about beforehand, like, hey, there's no limits. Like if we're having fun, we're having fun. And I think that's exactly what it turned out to be. So I think that's pretty cool.
Happy to hear that. And I'm also happy that there's 2x on YouTube so people can go a little faster if they need
Yes,
to.
and I will add the timestamps in there as well, so they can kind of skip around to stuff
Great.
that may make more sense. Um, anyway, this has been great. I'm gonna call it a day. Thanks everyone for hanging out, for being active in the chat, for sharing their experiences. Mary, good to see you. Thanks for sharing your experiences and your perspective with them as well. And we will catch everybody later on the stream. See ya.